Dead by Daylight is a game that hosts a plethora of unique characters, each with their own individual stories. Today, I'm going to be talking about 7 killers that perfectly represent the 7 deadly sins. And starting off, I don't believe that any character more perfectly encapsulates wrath than the Oni. The sin of wrath is described as uncontrollable anger or hatred, almost to the point to where it completely consumes that person. Kazan Yamaoka, better known as the Oni, is a perfect example of this, with his power in-game being to unleash all the anger that he stores up throughout the course of a trial. After repeatedly injuring survivors, he unleashes his rage in the form of a strength and movement speed boost. In his lore, Kazan was stated to have gone and killed almost all of the samurai in Japan, until people started calling him the Oni. His father had warned him to stop going around killing samurai, with each killing becoming more and more brutal. Until one day, after bashing a samurai skull open with a kanobo, he takes off his armor to realize it was his own father. With the guilt of his father's murder haunting him, he began to embrace the Oni persona, only allowing himself to be defeated once his hunger for bloodshed had been sated. Speaking of hunger, the sin of gluttony is described by the overconsumption of food, drink, or drugs to the point of waste. I don't believe that any killer embodies this sin more than the clown. Kenneth Chase, better known as the Clown, is a disgusting, morbidly obese killer who roams the map coughing, intoxicated from his drugs. He relies heavily on these drugs to either speed him up or slow other survivors down, and once he gets his hand on these survivors, he feasts upon the blood of their fingers, as well as hoarding them and adding them to his collection. Growing up, Kenneth had a horrible relationship with his family, which led him to become an alcoholic. As a kid, Kenneth would collect bird feathers that he found walking home from school, but one day he came across a poor bird that he did, well, rather unpleasant things to. After this, the rush of murder became just another one of Kenneth's addictions. One could argue he's actually driven by his addictions, with his bloodlust, power, and add-ons all being representations of them, with all of his add-ons being either chemicals or straight up porn. Speaking of which, I think we need to move on to the sin of lust. Lust is described as an unhealthy obsession with sex and/or pleasure. Similar to gluttony, lust can completely consume a person, with the two sins often going hand in hand. Elliot Spencer, better known as Pinhead, is a perfect example of when lust consumes a person. Elliot Spencer was a British soldier during World War I who was completely shell-shocked from what he had seen in the service. After returning home from his deployment, he found it very hard to find pleasure, pain, joy, or any emotion in his day-to-day life. Consumed by his nihilism, Elliot Spencer wandered the earth looking for anything that could satisfy his craving for emotion, until one day he discovered the Lament configuration. The Lament configuration was a demonic puzzle device that, once unlocked, would summon multiple Hell Priests. These Hell Priests would consume the souls of whoever unlocked the box, damning them to either eternal pain and/or pleasure. However, this is exactly what Elliot Spencer was looking for, and within a short amount of time he became the leader of these demons, known as Pinhead. He would go on to claim the souls of anybody who solved the box, deriving his pleasure from their pain. Another character who derives pleasure from others' pain is the Trickster, a character that I believe perfectly displays the sin of greed. The sin of greed is described to be an insatiable appetite for earthly possessions, fame, and/or attention. Jiwoon Hak, also known as the Trickster, was a rising K-pop star. He earned his fame in a K-pop group known as No Spin. However, this fame wasn't enough to keep him satisfied, as he wanted all the attention for himself. One day, while the group was recording their next studio album, fate had given him a lucky opportunity. After stepping out of the studio, Jiwoon had come back to his bandmates trapped inside of a burning room, caused by damaged wires. The door to escape the room was blocked off by speakers that had toppled over. Jiwoon began to try and move the speakers in order to save his bandmates when he realized that this was exactly what he had wanted. Consumed by his greed, he allowed his 4 closest friends to die in front of him, getting off to the sounds of their screams as they called for help. Hearing his dying friends calling out his name awoke something in him, something that would possess him to use other people's screams in his upcoming albums. Jiwoon would prey on unsuspecting fans and then record their screams as he tortured and murdered them. He would use the recording of these screams on his next and newest songs for all to hear. Not only did he become successful off the suffering of his friends, but he also used the suffering of others to increase his own fame. Another character who relied on the suffering of others was Amanda Young, who I chose to represent the sin of envy. Envy is the resentment of someone else's good fortune or wealth, and the desire to have it all for yourself. Essentially what we know to be jealousy. Before having an encounter with the serial killer known as Jigsaw, Amanda was a drug addict on the streets. She was abducted by John Kramer, a sadistic psychopath inventor who would force unsuspecting victims to undergo his trials. John Kramer believed that by torturing his victims, they would realize the mistakes that they were making in their day-to-day lives and become better people because of it. However, victims who didn't learn their lesson were to be subjected to John Kramer's brutal machinations. After murdering another man to save herself, Amanda believed herself to be changed by her encounter with Jigsaw. She began to worship him and even decided to work under him as an apprentice. However, she wasn't the only apprentice that Jigsaw had. In an effort to earn John Kramer's affection, she began to rig her trials and kill the victims that she was supposed to teach beautiful lessons to. But this backfired, as John Kramer really did want to help people in his own sick and twisted way and not just straight up murder them. He believed that by doing this, Amanda completely violated the entire point of the trials to begin with. As John Kramer became old and weak, Amanda was tasked with kidnapping a surgeon and forcing her to operate on John to save his life. However, Amanda became jealous at the thought of someone else taking care of John and ended up just killing the surgeon outright. That's when the husband of the surgeon actually shot Amanda in the neck, causing her to bleed to death. The whole thing was revealed to be another one of Jigsaw's tests, seeing if Amanda could overcome her jealousy, with it eventually consuming her and leading to her downfall. Amanda gave her life to John Kramer, but someone who would never give their life to anyone else is Albert Wesker. Albert Wesker perfectly embodies the sin of pride. Pride is described as an excessive love of one's own excellence or an obsession with the perfection of their own image. Albert Wesker believed himself to be special from a young age, with his parents giving him up to be injected with the progenitor virus. This virus allowed its host to have superhuman abilities, but was only given to vessels already seen as gifted. He was seen as a child prodigy and gave his life to the Umbrella Corporation, a pharmaceutical company that also made biological weapons. He eventually left the company and began to develop his own virus. He originally wanted to further the evolution of humans, but after injecting himself with his virus, he realized that his only solution was to wipe all of humanity. With his superhuman abilities, he believed normal humans to be a scourge on this earth, either injecting them with his virus or straight up killing them. With his ultimate goal being to infect the world with his virus known as Ouroboros, which would enhance the strong and kill the weak. However, his evil plans were foiled by Chris Redfield and Shiva Olimar, who had to kill him by shooting him into an active volcano. Seeing as regeneration was one of Wesker's many powers, the only way to affirmatively kill him was to vaporize every cell in his body and incinerate him entirely. His pride and passion of creating a master race that shared the same traits as him ultimately led to his downfall. Last but not least, we have the sin of sloth. While many people believe sloth to just be laziness, it's actually a sin that derives from lack of motivation. There is a killer who doesn't have motivation to participate in the entity's trials and also has protested many times against them. I'm of course referring to Evan McMillan, better known as the Trapper. Born into a wealthy household, Evan and his father ran the McMillan estate, an estate that housed many workers working in mines for the McMillans. However, Evan's father taught him to view the workers as beneath him and to rule the McMillan estate with an iron fist. Even though Evan initially opposed his father's sadistic views, as his father grew sick, Evan eventually listened to everything his father told him. One day, his father asked him to blow up the tunnels that the workers were in, and after sending many men down to their doom, he had the tunnels collapse due to explosives. Over 100 men either died from the initial explosion, the collapse of the rubble, or starved to death, trapped in the tunnels. This is when the entity swooped in and stole Evan McMillan. It forced him to kill survivors, feeding off of their emotion. However, Evan, remorseful after being manipulated by his father, declined the entity's request. However, these requests became demands, and Evan was punished by the entity. Similar to how Evan would have to put survivors on hooks to sacrifice them to the entity ran hooks through Evan's body. In a way, Evan was no different than the survivors he was harming, with hooks being ran through him and the entity feeding off his emotion as well as the survivors. But Evan was incredibly resilient and constantly protested the entity's advances. In the end, the entity was just too powerful, and now the Trapper walks as a mangled mess of flesh and hooks. You could also say Sloth made its way into the Trapper's playstyle. As the name suggests, Evan leaves traps laying around the map, doing the dirty work for him, so all he has to do is swoop by and collect survivors after they've stepped in bear traps. There are many killers in the realm who enjoy the quote-unquote thrill of the hunt. However, Evan is not one of them, and uses his bear traps to do his work. If that doesn't scream lack of motivation, I don't know what else does. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video, as this was a new kind of content that I've never touched before. However, real quick, I want you guys to know that I have a Twitch. I guess I haven't plugged it enough, but I do have a Twitch. Links are down in the description below. And also subscribe, seeing as over 90% of you are not subscribed. If you like the content and want to support even more, make sure you subscribe, follow the Twitch, and join the Discord. But that was the 7 Deadly Sins as Dead by Daylight Killers.